Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience in holding. We now have your speakers in conference. Please be aware that each of your lines is in a listen-only mode. I will now turn the conference over to Chris Hunt. Sir, you may begin.
Thank you. Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. Or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to using TeamSTEPPS to create change at the organizational, team, and individual level. It's this month's monthly TeamSTEPPS webinar, and it's part 2 of 3. So last month, we had our same speakers with us to talk about just the fundamentals of TeamSTEPPS and getting started. And this month, we're going to be getting into talking about change and a unique way of looking at change in multiple ways. So thanks very much for joining us. And as Brandon said, my name is Chris Hund, Director of Quality with the Health Research and Educational Trust. So we're part of the American Hospital Association. We're happy to be with you here today. Just some rules of engagement for the day. If you're listening to this over your computer speakers, you're going to want to mute your computer speakers just so you don't hear, I'm sorry, that's pretty funny. Of course, you want to listen to it on your computer. You're not muting your speakers. If you're listening to it over your phone, you're going to want to mute your computer speakers, because if you don't do that, you're going to get a lot of funny feedback. But please, if you're on your computer, don't mute your speakers. We are going to do a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but what we really stress and hope you do is chat your questions in the general chat box that's on the right-hand side of your screen as you're looking at it. This way we could answer questions as we go, and then if it's something that we think would be great for the whole group to hear about, we'll keep it towards the end, and then I'll do a moderated Q&A session with our speakers at the end. So that's how we're going to go about things today, and that's how we normally do it, so it seems to work well. If you ever have any questions about TeamSTEPPS now or in the future, or about TeamSTEPPS offerings, you can always email AHRQ@aha.org or give us a call on that helpline right there. And those are 2 great ways to get in touch with us. If you're having trouble right now with something in the webinar, please use that chat function, because we're all on the phone and we're all engaged with this webinar, so we wouldn't be able to pick up the phone. Okay, today's presenters, very happy to introduce them. All 3 of them work for the University of Washington Medicine, the WWAMI Institute for Simulation and Healthcare, and they have also all been involved with TeamSTEPPS for many years. The University of Washington has been a TeamSTEPPS Regional Training Center for 7 or 8 years, I believe. So we're very happy to have them here today. We have Ehrmantraut, who is a nurse by background and is Clinical Director of Team Performance with WISH. We also have Megan Sherman, who is an Associate Director of WISH, as well as Farrah Leland, who's also an Associate Director of WISH. And so all of them have brought a lot to the table over the past years about TeamSTEPPS, and I think that you're going to get a lot about how to really affect change and how to get people to really take ownership of their TeamSTEPPS work and not just kind of sit there and tacitly buy in. So with that, I'm happy to turn things over to the team from the University of Washington.
Thanks, Chris. And as Chris said, I'm Ehrmantraut. I am a nurse by background, and I've worked in the UW health system for over 30 years now. Most of my career was critical care at the bedside at Harborview Medical Center, which is one of the regional trauma centers. It's actually the only level 1 regional trauma center in the area. WWAMI stands for Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho, and those are the areas that we cover within our health system. I'm going to hand it over to Megan to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan Sherman. I am the Associate Director at WISH. I've been working in healthcare, mainly healthcare simulation, for the past 10 years now, and in that time have been very involved with TeamSTEPPS and team training and how it can be used both in a clinical and non-clinical setting. So I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Farrah Leland. I'm the other Associate Director of WISH, like Chris said, and I have a non-clinical background like Megan with a law background. and I've been doing TeamSTEPPS with the National Training Center since about 2009. Happy to be here today. So, UW-Medicine, a little bit about us. We have over 200 clinics and 4 hospital systems within UW-Medicine, as well as Airlift Northwest. We also have around 2,400 faculty members in over 30 departments, 4,700 plus clinical faculty across that WWAMI region, as Ross described. We have 4,500 students and trainees, which includes medical students, residents, fellows, PAs, and PhD students, medical technologists, all sorts of different types of students. And we have over 27,000 employees. So our objectives, what we're hoping you get out of this webinar today, is to identify and address resistance strategies to change it at its source core level. Understand the difference between ownership and buy-in. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then identify opportunities to incorporate. You will talk a little about different models of change, but focusing on one in particular. So I know it's hard to see you guys, but if everybody could just cross their arms like that, the picture, the image you see. Take a second to cross your arms. Okay, and now reverse which arm's on top and cross them the other way. Kind of uncomfortable. It's hard to do. It's not what you're used to. So it can be uncomfortable, even something as simple as crossing your arms. So focusing on from the TeamSTEPPS Master Trainer course, if you took it or if you're familiar with the TeamSTEPPS, they talk about the Cotter model. That we kind of categorize as at the organizational level, changing the organization. And then there is change in the individual. What we use as the model for that is the influencer, and there's the 6-box model. But what we're really going to focus on today is the change of the team, and the model that we like to use as kind of a starting point is the switch model, and Ross is going to talk about what the switch model is.
So I don't know who's familiar with this bridge. It's the Choluteca Bridge in Honduras, and this was designed by a group of architects from Japan, and this bridge was designed to withstand the worst possible natural disaster that could ever come about, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, whatever. And so they were pretty proud of what they did with this bridge, and as you can see, it's quite nice. And then in 1995, or in the mid-90s, Hurricane Mitch came through the Honduras, and was a very strong hurricane. And as you can see, the bridge withstood the hurricane, but what happened is the river moved. And that's kind of where we are in healthcare right now. We gotta continue to move with the river. Just because the bridge is still standing where it is doesn't mean it's doing what it has to do. So as healthcare changes with the Affordable Care Act, and now who knows what's going to happen with our current environment with healthcare, we have to be able to change with healthcare. And using these 3 models that Farrah just quickly talked about, we've been able to incorporate that into a lot what we do here at UW-Medicine. All of them overlap a little bit, so it's not like one is specific to organization, one is specific to team, and one is specific to individual. But we like to kind of use those 3 models for those specific areas, but they're definitely interchangeable. So, and you know, if you've been in healthcare for any amount of time, this is generally how we make change in an organization. And I think most of you will agree. We'll send out an email with a PowerPoint attached to that email, or a link to a learning management system, and say, hey, look this, follow this PowerPoint, get on this LMS, and then this change is going to occur September 1st. And we know we have to do the education and whatnot, but it's probably not the most efficient way without doing some other things as well. So for those of us that took any kind of courses in college related to biology or the brain or whatever, we know that there are 2 independent systems of our brain. We have the rational system, that's the conscious, the deliberative side of the brain. That's the part that analyzes everything. And then we have the emotional system. That's the unconscious or the automatic side of the brain. And within the switch model, which is what I'm going to focus on for the next probably 30 minutes now, is they call this the giant elephant, and we're going to get into that as we move forward here. So within Switch, there's a three-part framework, and Switch is by Dan and Chip Heath. They have several books out, and this is a book that we encourage people in our system when we work with change teams to read the book. We also go over pretty extensively because as we start implementing TeamSTEPPS in any of our groups, we use this model and walk through it systematically to develop the implementation plan. So within the Switch model, there's the three-part framework. There's the direct the rider, there's motivate the elephant, and then shaping the path. And we're going to touch on each one of these moving forward here. So first of all, directing the rider. I mean, if you think about that picture I had just a second ago, you saw the rider on top of the elephant. And, you know, the rider generally thinks that he or she is in control. But if that elephant wants to do what that elephant wants to do, there's no way that rider is going to stop them. And so we have to be able to tap into all three areas. Now, directing the rider, a lot of what we run into with change is people may not understand where we want them to go. And so you have to do the PowerPoints, you have to have the LMS, you have to have the education and training, and you even have to have protocols in place. But you still need to be clear on what the postcard, destination postcard is. And really, that's where our ultimate goal is. And the example up here is, you'll be third graders soon, and this is talked about in the book. You know, this is a first grade teacher that went in this low-income school district, and this district was so low income, they didn't have kindergarten. So most of the kids coming into school, first grade, not only couldn't read, but couldn't even recognize letters in the alphabet. And so she told them on day one, you are going to be third graders by the end of the year. She gave them something to shoot for. And then she called them scholars instead of students. And they started calling each other scholars. And gave them something to shoot for and reminded them of that destination postcard moving forward. Long story short, at the end of the year, all these students were actually, or 90% of these students were reading at a third grade level. And this classroom had the lowest absentee rate ever in that school district. So she was able to give them something to focus on, a long-term goal, and kept working systematically to get there. Now, when we work with teams in our system, that's one thing we ask them to do is to put together a destination postcard. And the example I'm going to use today throughout this is our operating room at one of our hospitals in our system, Harborview Medical Center. And early on, when we were going through the switch model, this is what they came up with on their destination postcard. First of all, they came up with their problem statement. There is a common disconnect in developing a shared mental model for all classes throughout the, or all cases, sorry, throughout the day. And then a pretty generalized postcard, implement a morning brief every OR to plan for the entire day in each room. So there's 26 ORs in this hospital. Their destination postcard was, we are going to have a brief in every single room before the start of the day for that entire day. Now, as you can imagine, when you come up, the change team came up with that and started talking to people, there was some resistance. Right away, we find why people will always want to go to why something doesn't work. And so I'm going to hand this over to Megan for a few minutes, and she's going to talk a little bit about resistance and how we address it.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, starting off, it's important to recognize that change, even small change, can really generate deep feelings of resistance. And so understanding why is it that we're resistant to change. And so what I want to do is invite everyone to kind of, in the text box there in the chat, just type in some ideas that you may have, why we're adverse to change. Fear, that it's scary, it takes work. Oh, lots of them, okay. It's uncomfortable, there's fear, it's unfamiliar, it can be painful, it's unknown, there's a sense of that it might be too hard, or there's uncertainty, too much work, that we're happy with the status quo. Great point, Vicki. I think that's a big one. So in the work that we do, some of the ideas that we've come up with for why people resist change are these ideas of fear, or that there's distrust in the messaging. there's maybe a lack of communication between where we're going and where we need to be, and how we're going to make that change. There's oftentimes people feel that change is just a fad, that this is something, it's a flavor of the month and it's going to be gone, and if I can just ride it out, I'm going to be set, and things will go back to normal. Other resistance might be that it challenges our specific routine, that people might be resistant because they have so much going on. There's just too many initiatives going on that they can't take on something. Or it could just be plain and simple that they don't understand what the change is all about. And so on a personal level, I think change can arouse our anxieties because we're unsure specifically whether or not our existing skills or contributions are going to be valued moving forward. At the organizational level, when we're talking about change, sources of resistance can really be attributed to three specific sources. There's technical resistance. This comes from the habit of following common procedures and consideration of the costs and resources associated with that change. This would be, we've already spent so much time and money on something that we need to keep it moving. We need to keep this project moving. We can't give up on it. Other sources might be political or the top-down approach. This often arises when an organization changes that they threaten powerful stakeholders or call into question the past decision of the leaders, saying that, oh, well, we've already been told by the board that we need to do, this is how something should be done, and so we're going to keep doing it that same way. Finally, the third source of change would be cultural or individual change. And this really emerges in the form that the systems or the procedures that reinforce the status quo. This is promoting existing norms and our assumptions of how things really should operate. It's that we just need to stay doing what we're doing. And this is how we've always done it, and it's worked. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So really recognizing change through a resistance audit may be beneficial. It's an important step in prepping your environment for change. And so performing a resistance audit could be looking at observable behaviors. Often resistance manifests itself as behaviors that can often be misread or misinterpreted. And so by understanding what these are or might be or how they might manifest themselves, we're able to kind of address those changes from the get-go. So for example, if there's an individual who's constantly delaying or providing excuses for why something's not being done, a step in the process. This oftentimes by a manager or even a colleague can be read as they're just incompetent or that they really don't like what they're doing, they have a poor attitude, and we kind of write it off as such. In fact, if you're looking at it from a resistance audit standpoint, maybe that this individual is really just confused over what role they play in the change and what the priorities of the organization are. And so by resolving this through things like providing explicit instructions or really having a proactive conversation about what the organization's priorities are, how we're moving towards change, those are all ways to kind of overcome those those manners of resistance. Additionally, I think we can share this slide as well. Other observable behaviors might be obsessive questioning, errors, or derailing or acting out. All of these have steps that are identified to kind of help resolve resistance to change in that manner.
All right, so as we start getting through our resistance, then we start taking it to the next level, and we're going to go back to direct the writer discussion a little bit. And the second part of directing the writer is finding the bright spots in there. And finding the bright spots is just looking for what's already working, and then how do we build from that? And some of you might be familiar with Jerry Stern, and he was kind of the guru of positive deviance, which is really just finding out what's working and really going to the people doing the work and say, hey, what's working here, and then how do we build from that? And Jerry Stern, back in 1990, was asked by an organization to go to Vietnam to help with some malnutrition. The malnutrition in Vietnam for children. Back then in 1990, there was a 70% malnourished rate for children under 5. And the Vietnam government was not interested in having him there, but they said you could come for 6 months. And all of Jerry's friends said, well, that's crazy, Jerry. You're going to go over there for 6 months and you're not going to have any chance to make a change. There's a huge undereducated population. Poverty's huge in Vietnam. and some other things. And Jerry's basically, his response is that's TBU, which is true but useless information. And he ended up going, and he took his wife and he took his son, and they went over and started meeting with people. And went the first village they went to, met with some people from that village, and asked them about their kids. And sure enough, their kids were malnourished, and asked them what they were doing for food. And just like everybody else in the village, they were getting 2 bowls of rice a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, basically. And he asked if there was anybody in this village whose kids were not malnourished, and it turns out there were a couple families. He asked them what they were doing, and nobody seemed to know, so they went and met with them and asked them what they were doing, thinking, well, maybe they have a rich uncle that was bringing them food or whatnot. And what turned out is these families were actually taking those 2 bowls of rice a day and splitting them into 4 bowls of rice. So the exact same amount of food, just splitting it into smaller portions throughout the day. And then going out to the rice paddies and getting shrimp and crab and just grinding those down and getting some sweet potato greens, throwing that all in there for some protein and whatnot. And that's all. It wasn't costing anybody a dime. So within this case of positive deviance, they found out that somebody in that village was already doing something that worked. So went back to the rest of the group. They were willing to try it. And so long story short, they let Jerry stay for over 2 years and his family. And what he did is he worked with that first group of people in the village, in that first village, and had them go out and teach other people in other villages to do the same thing. Over that period of time, 200 villages, 2 million people, the malnutrition rate went from 70% to less than 30%. So he was able to find what was working and build from that. We talk about in our system a lot when we go out and work with groups, ownership versus buy-in. And there's a good article on that, and we can send you the reference to that. But it's basically, when I say I want you to buy into something, that means it's my idea. And I think this is a good idea. Now I want you to think it's a good idea too, and I want you to do it. Ownership is, I think we should do something, but you get to decide how it moves forward. And that's how we approach all of our TeamSTEPPS implementation. This is not a top-down process. It has to be owned by the frontline staff. So when you meet with change teams, you go, well, TeamSTEPPS is happening. That's probably not an option. It's going to happen, but you get to decide how it's going to be implemented in your department. And so given them that ownership, it no longer becomes a top-down thing. You saw the resistance slides Megan said, a little bit of that political top-down thing. As soon as it comes from the top, people are going to have some resistance. So again, figure out what's working in the units. Ask the frontline staff what's going to work. A little bit like high reliability organizations and such. So that's the second part of Direct the Writer. Third part is script the critical moves. Decrease the amount of things you put in at once. I saw one of the answers in the slides were, yeah, we got too much all at once going. So let's shrink the change. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Ask them to do one small thing. And I'm going to give you an example here in my slides here with the Harborview OR. So here we go. We already gave you the destination postcard. And this is simplified. This was much more comprehensive when we sat down. But for this webinar, we just wanted to put something short together. So for finding the bright spots, we had a new faculty member, which was huge, come from another institution where they were doing briefs with great success. And he stood up in front of 400 surgical services staff and faculty and said, yeah, it took a while to get people going, and there was a lot of resistance, but now it's part of the culture in that institution, and they would be upset if the morning brief wasn't done. So we had him talking about what happened in another institution. Then we had several surgeons at the hospital that were willing to implement briefs and trial it, and they had great success and got positive feedback from other providers as well as the staff that were working on the surge techs, the RNs, anesthesiologists. People were like excited about how these were working. So they shared that information. It came from them, not the director of the surgical services, not from us, but from them. And then when they went to script the critical moves, they made it very easy. Here's who needs to be at the OR brief in the morning: the surg tech, the circulator, the surgeon, the anesthesiologist. At least those four. The resident can attend, and they should attend, but it's not required. And if there's some radiology component in there, then they try to attend as well. So made it simple, clear instructions on what to do. So now we're going to move into the next part of the switch framework, which is motivating the elephant. And this is really where you start tapping into that side of the brain that wants to do what it wants to do. You know, we travel a lot. We do these talks all over the country. And quite often after a 2-day course, we're pretty tired. I mean, we enjoy what we do, but we're tired, and we get to the airport to fly home, and we know we should probably have a salad for dinner, but then we walk by Cinnabon. And we smell the Cinnabon, and we go, wow, I worked really hard the last 2 days. I know I should have a salad, but I deserve a Cinnabon. And so then we go into Cinnabon. That's the elephant taken over. And so we need to tap into the elephant. We have to direct the rider, but we need to tap into the elephant. So first of all, finding the feeling. What works? What motivates people? We all know TeamSTEPPS is just the right thing to do. It's a patient safety issue, but it has other things. It makes employees happier, so it motivates employees to want to stay where they're staying. You know, the chemo video game is something they talk about in the book, where apparently teenagers are non-compliant with chemo once they get out of the hospital. And somebody came up with this idea to put a video game, a chemo video game together, 20 stages. Each stage would take about a half hour, and if the teenagers got through all 20 stages, they would probably be more compliant. Well, what they found is none of them got through the 20 stages, but just by playing this video game that appealed to teenagers, they found a 60% increase in compliance with chemo once they got out of the hospital. So you have to find what motivates. Everybody's different. What motivated a hand surgeon to want to do a brief in the morning? You had to ask them that. And quite honestly, most of the answers is nothing. We're already too busy. But then you start tapping in, well, what if we can look at turnover rates getting a little bit, turnover times getting better during the day because you are more efficient, because you realize you need something later in the day at 7 in the morning when you did the brief. So thinking about that, and again, we'll have examples. Shrink the change. This is a lot like scripting the critical moves. We call it the 5-minute rescue. You know, you have a kid, you tell them to go clean their room, and generally they just make it worse than when they started. But if you put an egg timer in there, set it for 5 minutes, and say, you know, you only have to do this for clean your room for 5 minutes, then you can be done. Well, once those 5 minutes are up, they tend to have a little bit of momentum and can continue moving forward. So don't give them multiple things, give them one thing to start with. And then growing your people. I mean, I told you I've been in this system for over 30 years, and it was a long time before somebody ever came up to me and said, hey, Ross, what keeps you in this system? We have to find out what keeps people moving forward, what motivates them to want to be here. What can we offer them to improve what they already are experiencing? So here's some examples we talked about in our OR when we implemented the brief. So how did we find the feeling? Well, first of all, we shared success stories. In fact, I kind of mentioned a hand surgeon because one of them was quite adamant that he didn't have time to do it. Well, you know, we talked to him and said, give it a try. Here's some possibilities that might occur. He is one of our biggest champions now. He shares those success stories from the pilot, how it's made a difference in his entire day in his ORs. The nurses, the circulators, and the surge techs are using the template, which they hadn't really talked about up front, but now they're using it for a handoff tool for break relief and finding it very helpful, which also the surgeons and the anesthesiologists appreciate that too, because when there's relief going on, those people know what's happening. And then addressing some of the financial aspects of what goes on in an OR. There's a huge potential to save money through better use of supplies. we may find at 7 a.m. that we don't need a certain kit for later in the afternoon, so we're not opening it and wasting it. That is something we're measuring now, and we think we're going to see some pretty good results from that. So multiple, you have to figure out who you're talking to because everybody's different. You know, a surge tech, what motivates them might be different than what motivates the anesthesiologist. So you have to make sure you tap into all of these people when you're making these changes. Shrinking the change, we reinforce that it could be done in 3 minutes. Everybody's concerned it would go on for 10 minutes. We've actually been timing it, and it's right at 3 minutes, a few seconds over 3 minutes average. So it's not taking up a huge part of the morning. And then we developed, I should say we, not we, they developed a simple template for the brief. And it started out pretty comprehensive, and they quickly were able to make it smaller and easier, and so people were using it. And then we have safety summits where everybody, we close the OR for 1 hour once a year and sit everybody in the room, 400 people sitting in a room, and they use the safety summit to showcase those who are consistently doing it and doing it well, and had those people go up and talk about what was working for them. And since then, they've presented at a conference and also at multiple patient safety committees. So there's an opportunity to reward those who have really done the work. And then finally, shaping the path. This is really human factors engineering at its best, I think. It's just making the right thing the easy thing to do. Or you could flip that around and say making the wrong thing the hard thing to do. And so tweaking the environment. What can we put in place that makes it easier for people to do the right thing? Visuals. I mean, if you've flown on in an airplane any time in the last 15 years, you probably know that if you go into the bathroom, in order to turn on the light, you have to lock the door. So nobody sent you a PowerPoint attached to an email telling you how you lock the door or how you turn on the light in the bathroom on an airplane. You just figure it out. It's intuitive. And that's what we're trying to make some of this. How do we make this easy to do the right thing? How do you build habits? That's the second one. Well, we checklist. We have lots of checklists in healthcare now. That, you know, the central line checklist has actually dropped our complication rate here at UW from 15% to less than 1%. Just doing the same, putting in the central line the same way every single time, following this checklist. So checklists are a good thing. And then there's action triggers, which don't actually make you do something, but it makes you think about it. For those of you nurses out there, or could be anybody in healthcare, but you know, you think about the Pyxis machine. A lot of institutions have put like a red carpet or something around their Pyxis machine, meaning if I'm standing at the Pyxis machine, you shouldn't talk to me. That doesn't mean you can't. It just kind of encourages you not to. That's an action trigger. And then finally, rallying the herd. We want to do what other people are doing. Behavior is contagious. Good behavior is contagious. Bad behavior is contagious. And, you know, we're in Seattle where Starbucks is probably, they're like 20 feet from each other in this city, and nobody comes to work without going to Starbucks first. And I get to Starbucks every morning, and I'm there about the time they're opening because I come to work. And inevitably, when I go in there, even if they've just unlocked the door for me, I walk in there, there's already money in the tip jar. And the reason they do that is it just makes me want to not be the jerk that doesn't tip too. So they do things like that. We want to do what other people are doing. Same thing with hotel towels. You know, you go into a hotel, you stay in a hotel, and you find everybody has a sign that says, save the planet, reuse your towel, which is a great idea, but it's a little overwhelming to me. How do we narrow that down a little bit? Well, we want to do what other people are doing. 2 hotels decided to put signs in their rooms that said, most of our guests reuse their towel in this hotel. And that's all they did, nothing fancy. And they had a 60% increase in reuse of towels in that hotel. So think about who's doing it well, how do we build off that? So here's a great example of shaping the path. You can't make this stuff up. This was the Amsterdam airport. The custodians were complaining about what they called spillage around the urinals. And somebody came up with this idea, where that red circle is, somebody came up with the idea to etch a fly into the urinal, effectively putting a target in the urinal. And right away at the Amsterdam airport, spillage dropped to almost nothing. They didn't have to put a sign up. They didn't have to send out a PowerPoint. It was just intuitive that people would aim at the fly. Probably a little bit more information than you want, but it's a great example of putting systems in place that make it easier for people to do the right thing. So here's what we did with Heart Review. Again, this is really simplified for the purposes of this webinar, but you can get the idea. One, tweak the environment. How did we tweak the environment? Well, first of all, they revised the template to make it streamlined. That made it easier. Then they placed the templates in a visual spot in every single OR room. So you walked in, I mean, even if you didn't think about doing the brief, it was there. They tweaked the timing for the brief so all could attend. Struggled with that a little bit, trying to find the right timing for it. And then they came up with a plan to let people phone conference in to conduct the brief, mostly for the surgeons because they might be on rounds. And at first they were coming up with all kinds of reasons why they couldn't do it. Well, okay, how about phone conferencing? Now, I can tell you Heart Review's been doing it for almost 9 months now, and they complete the brief about 80% of the time, which I think in a change going from 0 to 80% in 8 months, a change of that magnitude was pretty impressive. They built some habits by making the template simple to use. That was no longer a barrier. They advertised how often the brief was occurring. So reminded people, yeah, okay, now we're at 40%. Here's where it's occurring. And then they used the templates to track significant info. And this was really a big one because individually people didn't know how much difference it was going to make. But over time, as they tracked this significant information, they found that 70% of the time they were finding information that was significant for the rest of the day. Things, and I'll get a little bit more into that on the next, on rallying the herd, which I'll just go into that now. Frequent reports to staff and providers of good catches. That was huge. That goes back to tracking significant info. Needed an implant later in the day that maybe wasn't in our implant room and they had to get it from another hospital in the system. Or positioning plans. Things changed through the day or that people didn't know, and they were able to address these early on. And finally, had informal and formal leadership share how the brief is working for them. Again, I'll go back to that hand surgeon, but we've had multiple surgeons and anesthesiologists, well, everybody in the OR that's been involved in the briefs. They're at a point now where they're almost angry when they don't occur. There are still some people that are resisting them, and we're trying to work on that, but mostly we're working on who wants to do it, who's doing it well, and how do we keep moving it forward instead of focusing on those that don't want to do it. So again, this is the switch framework that we just went through. The key to this, you know, we've talked about this for about 30 minutes now. We spend a lot of time with our groups with this, but before we did, we practiced it a lot ourselves. I mean, I made it sound a little easier than it is. I would encourage you to read the book to begin with, and we get no royalties from it. But and then practice working through it yourself, maybe within your own team. How are we going to direct the rider? In fact, that's the easiest part. Directing the rider is the easiest part. But how are we going to motivate the elephant? And how are we going to move forward to shape the path? So, you know, as you guys, when Megan asked about resistance and you put things up there, there's some really good ones. One of my favorites that I've seen before is, you like change, well then you go first. We have to keep in mind though, if you want change, failure is part of the deal. And quite often what we see, as soon as something goes wrong, people are ready to throw in the towel on it. You have to keep your destination postcard in sight at all times. That shouldn't change. What might change is the process on how you get there. So keep that in mind, and we remind our change teams all the time, and we do that proactively. Hey, there's things that are not going to work, and then we're going to come back and we're going to reevaluate those. So, you know, you're basically, for all of us that are involved in quality improvement, the PDSA, looking at how do we plan, do, study, and act this as we move forward. And this change model that we use has been very effective for us. So here is our contact information. And with that, I know Farrah and Megan have been answering questions as we go, but I'll turn this back over to Chris for any other questions.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for the great presentation. Really appreciate it. And yes, there's been some good questions coming in that both Megan and Farrah have been covering, and I've grabbed a couple of those that people may have missed, and didn't get a chance to read the answers to, that we might want to circle back on, and then there's also a couple of other ones. So, right at the end there, you were talking about how directing the rider is probably the easiest part of this, and that it's hard to motivate the elephant and hard to shape the path. And somebody asked, would you recommend shaping the path first? Coming up with those processes and ways of doing work before you tap into both the rational and emotional sides?
So I would argue that yes, the environment it's a great place to start if you think it's an easy start. However, don't underestimate the power of the kind of rational story or the emotional impact of really getting this change going. And so yes, you might be able to tweak the environment as kind of your early starting place, but the other two, specifically the emotion, really drives a lot of individuals towards really embracing change as it comes up.
Yeah, and I Chris, but I also think that there's no, even though that's the way they're written out in the book and how we presented them, I would say whatever, each group's going to be a little bit different, and if I really had to rank them in order of difficulty, finding the feel or motivating the elephant is the hardest, shaping the path second hardest, and then direct the rider would be the easiest. So you have to, I guess we like to go with the low-hanging fruit too. What are some areas we can address pretty quickly there? And usually education's the easy one. So trying to work through those. You don't have to systematically work through all 9 steps. You might end up bouncing around.
So when you're combining this with your ideas that you were bringing up about how it's better to get people to take ownership as opposed to buying in, would you want them to help shape the path because they're shaping kind of the direction things are going in and how work is being done? Is that going to be important to the idea of them being owners of what's happening?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think to engage as many folks as you can in the process, shaping what the process looks like, and that means shaping the path as well. It's a critical step in kind of providing that sense of ownership, I think.
Yeah, and one example we didn't even talk about, we worked with one of our groups in our health system, and their change team decided that they wanted everybody to go through the switch model. So during our trainings, we spent an hour and a half presenting the switch model, and then they went through the 9 steps, and what we did is broke them into different groups. One would do direct the rider, one did motivate the elephant, one did shape the path, and they wanted to implement a couple tools, and they went through that process. Everybody on the entire staff, faculty, so over 200 people were involved in developing. So that's ownership at its highest level that we've been able to get. Most of the time it's our change teams that we do it with.
Got it. So when you're thinking about folks that you've been involved with this, taught people about switch, what percentage of people, and you maybe don't know the exact number here, but what percentage of your management team throughout UW has really kind of demonstrated consistent ownership of this model? Are people, using it after you're teaching them?
Yeah, I think after the groups that we've worked with, the teaching on the model, definitely. We also have another department that we've worked with, our organization development and training, who we've worked on this program together with them originally, and so it's working not only for the TeamSTEPPS thing, but they're introducing it in the things they're doing too. So, you know, it's a huge system, and like anything, everything moves slow. But yeah, it's definitely the ones that we've worked with on it are using it. And one of our groups, like for example, that OR group, the example we used today, they actually bought the book for all members of their change team, which was extremely helpful too.
So. You know, I could imagine that this also, being involved with this would also help with some satisfaction, workplace satisfaction issues. I know I was reading the comments here, and I know that either Megan or Farrah wrote, and that you know, that's something that you're currently starting to track in UW, if this has been helpful in improving workplace satisfaction. But without data, do you have any kind of, you know, general feeling or any stories, anecdotes that you've heard that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, Chris. It's interesting because just recently we've received 2 emails from leadership in departments we've worked with that on the employment engagement survey, which occurred here, I'm losing track of time, but within the last 5 months or so, people, one of the common themes in the units were they really appreciated the implementation of TeamSTEPPS. You know, I'm just paraphrasing what they said, obviously, but it's made a difference on how they've worked as a team and stuff, and people really like it and are actually asking for ongoing and more of it. So, you know, that would be the closest we would have to hardcore data from that employee engagement survey with the goal. And one of the things we do look at is turnover rates, and we have had, like one of the areas we worked with, their turnover rate over the years has decreased. You know, we like to take credit for that. I don't know that we can take all the credit, but we like to take as much as we can. And but it was pretty cool to get those unsolicited emails from leadership from 2 different departments just recently saying a common theme was they liked the TeamSTEPPS, they liked how they were part of the process versus a top-down thing. And I think that's what we run into all the time is frontline providers and staff, they're told that we're going to do things. We have outside consulting groups coming in, we have new EMR, and they're just told without much input on how it's going to work. And that's the difference in how this program, I think, that's what makes a huge difference in this program.
That's great. Yeah, no, it's great to get that feedback. There was a question that came in pretty early on that was about, you know, what does it mean to adapt people to find, you know, using their strengths for a better fit, find a better fit. And Megan and Farrah had a great comment about this and answered this. I'm wondering if they could kind of reiterate what they had said in the chat area in case people didn't have a chance to read it as the comment was scrolling by.
Yeah, Farrah's looking it up right now. Hang on.
Sorry, I was talking, so I didn't get to see all the comments, so I'm not sure which one you're talking about, Chris.
It was the aces in their places answer.
Yeah, go ahead, Megan. So, I mean, just kind of this adapting, finding what's going to work best for the individual. I'm going to credit past working at Jamba Juice in my younger with this was a mentality that came from them. Putting aces in their places was how they did business. It's really identifying what are the critical steps that need to be done and who's best suited to do those. And so if you have an individual who's resistant to change, really identifying, okay, well, what is it, the pace of change? Is it that they don't feel like they can complete their responsibilities or their roles? And then identifying, are there other areas that you can deploy them that they'll be more successful in helping the change progress, whether it be a slower pace or even a faster pace. Maybe it's they're resistant because it's taking stuff off their plate that they don't want off their plate. So giving them more to do. It's just really kind of identifying what's going to be the best suited area for these individuals on your team and deploying them there.
That's great. So, yeah, sorry, Ross.
Well, there's just this question about any experience with this in a GI single specialty. We have worked with, not in an ambulatory surgery center, but within our health system. We're working extensively with the GI group right now, and it's pretty much at the infant stages of it. But again, this is a group that has worked on, their change team has done some switch work, and they're starting their training, actually have done their training, and now are implementing some stuff in there with pretty good early successes. But you know, one of the things we found early on that you can't expect a lot to happen quickly. If you do, you're going to be disappointed. And so keeping moving forward is what we're doing with that group. And we just, again, had another meeting 2 days ago, and they're moving forward. And the model's been effective with addressing some of the issues they have with the providers and some of the staff there too. And I can't remember whose name that was, but you know, you can email us and we'd be happy to give you more information on what we're doing with that program.
Thanks, Ross. Something here you had said earlier when you were talking about buy-in versus ownership, that it's easier, or not easier, but you know, more successful, of course, to go to somebody and say, we're going to do TeamSTEPPS, and you know, I want you to take ownership and you know how it's rolled out or how you're going to use some of these tools to solve some of your challenges. That seems like it would be easier for somebody in leadership or a peer to come to somebody and say that. What do you do if the person maybe is you know, not a provider, somebody in education that might be going into a group of physicians and saying, you know, we want you to do this, and we want you to figure out how to do it. That seems like that may not work as well. So how do you get that ownership kind of starting up when you're dealing across the hierarchy gradient? I guess would be the best way to say it.
So I'm glad you asked that question, because I should have clarified that a little better earlier. And in our model here, you know, we use the consulting model with that's Megan, Farrah, and I spend a lot of time going into departments, and you know, that is my full-time job. But we still guide them, okay? And we do go in and say, we want you to own the process, but we're going to help you with guide. We're not just going to say, go forth and prosper. I'm trying to find my words here, but we're going to guide you through the process, knowing on what we know, or giving you the experience of what we've seen works and what doesn't work. We're not going to let you go down the wrong street. Now, the flip side of that is you also have to get the right people on your change team to begin with. And you're always going to find people, like you just said, Chris, that aren't going to want to do it. But there are people that do want to do it. I don't care what their profession is. A physical therapist, a nurse, a physician, a PA. There's always somebody on a team that's going to want to be involved in pushing this forward because they see the value in it. Those are the ones that you get to turn around. You guide them, and then they turn around and they bring the rest of the people on in their profession on board with this program. So we don't go in and say, hey, you guys are doing TeamSTEPPS, you get to figure out how to do it. We guide you on how to do it. We don't dictate, but we do guide. And we might even push you down a certain way, knowing from experience. But ultimately, they walk out feeling like, yeah, we owned how this is going to happen. And every group we've done that with, I think we can safely say that it was not a top-down thing, that they felt like they owned the process.
Got it. Thanks. So, and I know this is something that we've kind of chatted about before in regards to TeamSTEPPS, but it's a question here from Randolph about integrating lean engineering work with the switch methodology. And you know, I've not thought about that. I know that we've done some discussing about lean being crosswalked over to some of the TeamSTEPPS tools, and that, people can feel free to contact us, and we can, send you some resources and point you towards some folks that have talked about that before. But Ross, I don't know if you've ever talked to anybody about the switch methodology, maybe especially in the shaping the path mode of things, and linking in the lean.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one that I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out how best to cross those bridges, or to integrate those together. I can tell you, groups that we work with, we do some process mapping up front, and do the little sticky notes on the wall and whatnot to figure out, depending on what the process is they want to look at. And then using that and using the switch model as well as the TeamSTEPPS tools, we try to figure out how do we get, where can we fit into these processes. Trying to work with our department's called the Transformation and Care Department, trying to work with them as much as possible, because I know lean, but I'm not an expert in it. So we do utilize those guys, and they call on us a lot to come in and work with them on different projects related to opening of new clinics, just even the GI group that I was mentioning. We were very involved with lean or worked with them on doing some of the work with our GI group. So I know that's not the answer you're looking for, Randolph, but you can't do them separately, obviously, because it is too much on people's plates. But you can start to integrate them by tapping into those people that do have a lot of lean experience to figure out, okay, how can we make sure these two go together? And I know like Chris said, they have some pretty good information from other facilities that are doing it. And so, sorry, that's about the best I can come up with that one.
That's great, and I think we're getting close to the end of the time here. I wanted to put a plug in for the webinar next month as Ross, Megan, and Farrah complete the trilogy here of the series we're doing, and they're going to be talking, the title of the webinar is Maintaining the Gains and Continued Evolution of the TeamSTEPPS program. And so it's going to be on Wednesday, September 13th, same time, so that's 1 to 2 Eastern time, 12 to 1 Central. And it's the final, like I said, of the 3-part series, and they're really going to be getting into, how their implementation process has been sustained, how they've looked for the bright spots, what we learned here in the switch model, how they took those bright spots and really have leveraged them, and how they go about evaluating the process and adjusting as they go along. So I'd like to invite you all to join us for that, and I'd like to thank you all for attending, and then also thank Ross, Megan, and Farrah very much for being able to join us today for this presentation. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference. You may now disconnect your lines, log off the webinar. Have a great afternoon.